When the fourth president of the United States, James Madison, talked about the concept of checks and balances in our government, he highlighted its crucial role in curbing human ambition. The man known as the father of the Constitution famously said, quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." The latest scandals to rock the Supreme Court involving a pair of flags, part of an ongoing saga of ethics scandals, vividly illustrate Madison's point. These scandals include troubling revelations that Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito accepted lavish gifts from billionaire Republican donors, including prominent supporters of conservative causes directly linked to cases before the court. The latest scandal involves an upside-down American flag displayed at Alito's home shortly after the January 6th riot and a Christian nationalist flag that was displayed at a vacation home. The flags, which were the same as those flown by some January 6th rioters, raised serious concerns about Alito's impartiality and fairness at a time when two January 6th cases are pending before the court. Despite mounting calls for Alito to recuse himself from the two cases, he doubled down this week, saying that the flag incidents, quote, "do not meet the conditions for recusal." Alito claims his wife put up the initial upside-down flag in direct response to a dispute with neighbors. However, that was later debunked by a recent New York Times report revealing that that dispute with the neighbors actually occurred weeks after the flag had already been flown. All this comes amid growing calls for Supreme Court reform, even as Republicans in Congress have shown little inclination to hold the court accountable. And Chief Justice John Roberts issued a defiant statement this week, refusing to engage with top Democratic lawmakers about ethics concerns, asserting that justices alone determine the appropriateness of recusal. But the crisis of the court's integrity is undeniable. According to a recent survey by Marquette University Law School, a majority of Americans, 56%, believe that the justices' decisions are politically motivated rather than based on law. For more on this, I'm joined by Jena Griswold, Colorado's Secretary of State. She's also the chairperson of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. Secretary Griswold, good to see you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
This is not an abstraction for you because the Supreme Court ruled in March to reject your state's attempts to remove Donald Trump from the ballot for the role that he played in the January 6th riot. In light of these recent controversies and the fact that we are learning more about where certain members of the Supreme Court, where their sentiments lie on these things, what does this make you think?
Well, always glad to join you, Ali. And, you know, I was party to the Trump disqualification case, where actually 6 Republican and unaffiliated voters in the state of Colorado filed suit saying Trump could not be on the ballot because he engaged in insurrection. That case made its way all the way to the United States Supreme Court. To tell you the truth, Ali, going to the United States Supreme Court felt a little different than it would under previous courts, precisely because some of the corruption issues and the fact that, you know, Clarence Thomas's wife was part of at least the planning of the insurrection or supporting of it. And I do think that there is a major ethics issue with the court, and there's a major confidence issue in the court. So we just have to continue to, I think, apply pressure and demand that the court does adopt real ethics reform. Now, whether this court's actions would have been different with ethics reform for the Trump disqualification case, I don't think it would have. We faced a unanimous decision. But I do understand major concerns with the other January 6th cases that are making their way or are already before the court.
Right. And of course, we have the broad question of immunity that the Supreme Court has not come forward with a decision. Now, they don't have a deadline on this, except for the expiration of the court session. And we still have many weeks where this can still happen. But it almost feels like no decision is a decision on determining whether Donald Trump is immune from anything he did as president. To most lay people, they think that that's an outrageous sort of suggestion. But it has still not actually been determined by the Supreme Court. And that's germane to the fact that we have an election in 5 months and 4 days.
That's right. And I think it's really telling when you compare the immunity case to the Trump disqualification case. The Trump disqualification case was filed with the Supreme Court during Christmas, the week after Christmas. The court took it up, I believe, the first week of January, and we were having oral arguments the second week of February, on I believe it was February 6th or February 8th. So we saw that case move rapidly. In part, it may be because states had to determine whether Trump was actually on the ballot or off the ballot for Super Tuesday. But we did see that the court could move very quickly on a case related to Trump. I do want to highlight that the court may be moving slowly in the immunity case, but the American legal system does not only rest on the United States Supreme Court. And we saw that up close and personal with the Trump hush money case this week.
What do you make of, there's some senior Democrats who have asked Justice Roberts to have this discussion. He says the rule is that nobody tells Supreme Court justice whether to recuse or not. That's their decision. And he may be completely right in legal terms. I don't know enough about these things. But there is a legitimacy crisis out there. What's your sense of how we address this legitimacy crisis? It would be great if Roberts would say, I understand that some of you are losing faith in the court, so here's what we're going to do. But we have not seen much out of the court in terms of addressing the fact that some Americans think that this is too politicized.
I think that's right. And the best option would be for the court itself to read the room. When you have major scandals involving Justice Thomas in himself taking all those gifts, and also his wife's role around the January 6th insurrection and the attempts to not peacefully transfer the presidency, and then you add in the latest scandals, the Flaggate, it would seem to me that the court would see that there are major issues. And I do think it's appropriate for Congress people, for all elected people, to call on the court to do better. We have seen this court roll back fundamental freedoms in an unprecedented way in recent times, whether it's, on voting rights, whether it's on the right for women to be full citizens in this country and access health care, to some of these major cases around Donald Trump and presidential power. So I think there are options on the table. But I would just say the larger picture is we have a democracy in crisis, in a large part because Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans have used all their influence to try to undermine both our legal system, which we saw in the hush money case with some of Trump's rhetoric, but in a bigger part, our elections. And yes, we have the Supreme Court acting as it is, but remember, Americans can take a major step forward in November and continue to safeguard our elections. So we can't despair. We have to continue to show up to the polls, and Americans can save American democracy in November with their voices and with their votes.
Yes, that is the one thing it seems everybody across the political spectrum agrees upon, that we have the ability to make a decision on this and decide how we want our country to unfold. And thank you for the work that you do as the Secretary of State at the front lines of this thing. We always appreciate you being on the show. Jena Griswold is the Secretary of State of Colorado.